Students, colleagues, visitors, and friends, welcome to the Advancing Climate Policy Solutions Now lecture. I am Nisha Bochwe, the Dean of the Humphrey School of Public Affairs, and it is my honor to welcome each of you here tonight at Northrop. This speaker series was made possible by a friend of the Humphrey School and the University of Minnesota, someone who is known to many of us, Mr. Tom Swain. This year, Tom turned 101 years old. He says 101 because it rhymes. And rather than looking backward at his life, Tom is looking ahead at the future of our planet, the fate of his grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Tom wanted to enlist his fellow citizens to find solutions and take action to reduce the climate threat. We at the Humphrey School knew we could answer his call and develop the Climate Policy Series backed by our expertise in public issues that emerge at the intersection of science, technology, the environment, and society. We are thrilled to have you, we are thrilled that you've joined us this evening. I'd like to thank ASL Interpreting Services for providing sign language interpreters tonight. Thank you. And now, I would like to tell you about tonight's speaker, Marshall Johnson. Marshall is the Chief Conservation Officer for the Audubon, an environmental organization dedicated to the conservation of birds and their natural habitats. He leads development of strategic direction for hemispheric-wide conservation work at Audubon to address the biodiversity crisis facing birds. A University of Minnesota Crookston alum, Marshall served as vice chair of the Student Senate in the University of Minnesota system. He also received the university's Abby Young Alumni Award in 2021. After his keynote, Marshall will take some time to answer some of the questions our students at the Humphrey School submitted, and some of the questions you may have submitted in the audience. Unfortunately, Catherine Hoffman of the Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy is not able to join us this evening, so I am looking forward to having that conversation with Marshall a little later. So it's time to turn off your phones or silence these devices we have. I see a number of you reaching for them now. And hear what the birds tell us about climate change with Marshall Johnson. Welcome, Marshall Johnson.
The haunting wail of the common loon, a sound that sweeps across our skies and into our hearts at dusk and dawn. A song as synonymous with these lands we call Minnesota as the 10,000 lakes themselves. For centuries, First Peoples, Ojibwe, Sioux, have come to think of the loon as the spirit of the wild north, representing harmony, generosity, and peace. Now, did you catch what I said there? 4 centuries. In fact, archaeologists have uncovered loon fossils which date back more than 35 million years. We've only been here for a few thousand. Loons have been calling out from these waters of the north since before even our ancestral people were on this land. I often think of birds and the song of birds as my playlist in nature. In this way, birds are a constant companion to humanity. When I think about this, I think about birds as being like the stars. They've always been here. Perhaps no creature roaming the earth, waters, or skies has inspired more poems than our state bird. Its cry, touching the souls of poets who identify so much of human wanting and desire and loss in the loon's cry. In reality, they're just saying hello, okay? Most of the time, these birds are really calling out, wanting safety. And you don't have to be a poet either. You just have to listen. As you can imagine, in my role, my passion, my work, I do a lot of listening to birds. I would tell you that we all should. Birds tell us. We like to say at Audubon that birds tell us. I joined Audubon as a part-time, 20-hour-a-week climate organizer in Fargo, North Dakota, following graduation from the University of Minnesota Crookston, Ski-U-Mah. I had planned on working for Audubon for no more than 6 months. It was a 6-month plan to work for Audubon to get this bird itch that I had caught at the university out of my system. And of course, it's the worst 6-month plan I've ever come up with because that was more than 13 years ago now. What can I say? Birds, the power of birds and the people who love them have a unrelenting grip on me. I grew up in urban Dallas and Los Angeles. I never even knew that there were people who counted their full-time careers as protecting birds. I'll tell you, I never knew that we needed to protect birds. Our birds needed our protection. Birds are the prism through which Audubon views its work. Birds take us to the places, to the people, to the communities that we work with. Across Minnesota, across the northern Great Plains, and across the entire Western Hemisphere, from the boreal forest to Bogota, Colombia. Birds, billions of which are at this very moment filling our skies and our backyards as they migrate across the hemisphere. They have this special way of linking our communities. The birds in our backyards in the summers will be someone's birds in their backyard 3, 4, 5, 15,000 miles from there. Birds tell us through this miraculous journey that they take where the most important places are to protect for their survival. Places like Glacial Ridge National Wildlife Refuge, the landscape where I came to love birds and the environment and bird conservation. Where Audubon, Minnesota recently completed the first phase of a wetland project on nearly 1,000 acres of critical habitat that will restore critical habitat for sandhill cranes and one of my favorite birds, the prairie chicken. The Glacial Ridge is a key priority area within a globally important bird area, one of 57 important bird areas identified right here in Minnesota. And part of an ambitious plan led by our Audubon, Minnesota Executive Director, Rob Schultz, and his amazing team. I want members of the team to raise their hand and let's give them applause. They're doing amazing work. Don't be shy. This team is combining science and education, advocacy and policy, and on-the-ground conservation to conserve and restore natural ecosystems, focusing on birds and their habitats to strengthen our biological diversity for birds and for ourselves. I'll tell you, birds tell us a lot if we are keen enough to listen. Birds are telling us that the climate is changing. We know that our climate is changing. We know that our climate is changing right here in Minnesota. A mighty Mississippi River, which we look to with more uncertainty than ever before in most of our lifetimes. Fires which rage thousands of miles away, darkening our summer skies. While not everyone will be obliged to track global temperatures, all Americans understand the importance of fresh water, fresh drinking water, the threat of flooding, and the dangers of extreme drought. At Audubon, our work is rooted in community action, driven by science, policy, and on-the-ground conservation. In 2019, Audubon published Survival by Degrees, 389 bird species on the brink. A groundbreaking study based on years of research that bore out one extreme warning. North American birds face a dire future if the current pace of global climate change continues. 2/3 of American bird species at risk. This dire reality includes our summer companion, the common loon, which is among 55 species likely to disappear from Minnesota in most of our lifetimes if we do not act now. Birds tell us we must strongly and substantively reduce greenhouse gas emissions by transitioning to greater use of renewable energies, the power of, and really empowering healthy ecosystems that provide natural protections for bird habitat, sequester carbon out of the atmosphere, and put it to good use. Carbon is not a fundamentally bad thing. The carbon cycle is essential for us. You'll see the different scenarios for the loon showing warming at 1.5 degrees Celsius, 2 degrees, and the worst, 3 degrees, and the stark implications for loons. All of the red, habitat lost, and unable to reproduce. At 3 degrees, the expressive song that touches so many of us could disappear from Minnesota. A warmer climate creating early season heat waves will impair the loon's nesting success and possibly even starve young chicks. Birds are an incredible bellwether of what is happening in the environment. They're telling us they're in trouble. And if they are in trouble, you can assure yourself that we are too. We must listen to birds, like coal miners in West Virginia long ago who, prior to current technology, relied on little canary birds to pave the way to more breathable, clean air. When I say that we must listen to birds, one of the key elements that I am referring to is the science. A few takeaways from our peer-reviewed Survival by Degrees. 2/3 of North American birds that are impacted by climate change. In the study, we looked at 9 existential climate threats facing birds. And should our climate increase beyond 2.5 degrees Celsius, 1/3 of bird species will face 3 or more existential threats, such as fire, sea level rise, and extreme weather. However, if we hold stable at 1.5 degrees Celsius, we reduce exposure to triple threats, to approximately 5% of American bird species, or just 34 species. Our science also shows that if we take action now, we could help improve the chances for 76% of those species at risk. We already know that we need to do more to protect birds. Protect the places that they need today and tomorrow, and in addition, take personal action at home. We must urge action at the state and federal policy levels to address the roots and drivers of climate change. Today, our global temperature is at 1.1 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. We are experiencing dangerous flooding and drought, heat waves, and forest fires. Heat waves today occur 5 times more often, as well as being more extreme. A global rise to 2 degrees Celsius will have cataclysmic impacts. Heat waves will then occur 14 times more often. Ice sheets will melt. Seas will rise as much as 16 feet, devastating coastal communities and bird habitat. Yet in the midst of all of this, you know this story. I'm going to stop with what you know, because in the midst of all of this, I want to bring you a hopeful message of what we can, should, and will do. You may wonder why I am optimistic. I'm only 36 years old. I have to inherit whatever happens here, as many of you do. Indeed, as the Chief Conservation Officer for the National Audubon Society, I am extremely motivated by the fact that there exists an incredibly large and potent, influential constituency for birds and for the climate. Did you know that there are 47 million birders in the United States? And I didn't just pull that number out of my cowboy hat. The Department of Interior tracks recreational activity, and birding is the second fastest growing recreational hobby in the United States. Now, there are not 47 million registered Republicans. There are not much more than 47 million registered Democrats, but there are 47 million passionate birders that care about the environment and care about birds and care about habitat. And they invest billions every year in the economy, and that's billions with a B. What if we, as an organization, as a movement, could empower and mobilize that constituency in this time of need? You may laugh when I say that birds and those people who love them can change the world, but we already have time and time again. It's really a root story for Audubon. Courageous women creating the first Audubon societies, taking on one of the most powerful industries in the globe. At one time, the millinery industry, a pound of feathers were worth more than a pound of gold. Can you imagine the entrenched interests, the power that those courageous men and women went up against? But they won. They changed the fashion industry forever. So how will Audubon today work with the support of that 47 million constituency? We have 1.9 million members at the Audubon Society. Those are our frontline ambassadors. 600 campus and community chapters like the ones right here in the Twin Cities. How will we deploy this incredible constituency? I have a couple of ideas. Recognizing that impacts to ecosystems, habitats, and wildlife, especially birds, are among the top reasons that renewable energy projects often stall or fail. It's critical that the Audubon Society and the birding movement plays a central role in driving the deployment of renewable energy over the next 5 and 10 years. It's essential for us to get to a net zero future. All forms of energy, particularly industrial energy, have impacts for birds and climate. I have to tell you folks, there is no free lunch. However, with responsible siting for wind and solar, we can rapidly deploy these technologies to meet this challenge. Audubon needs to be proactive in this battle. The Audubon movement has a strong role to play in ensuring that key species and high conservation areas for birds are protected as much as possible, and in accordance with federal and state laws, ensuring the integrity of these existing laws that drive permitting in this country, including the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. To achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, renewable energy project developers will need a landmass the size of Colorado and Wyoming combined. We have got to play a role in seeing that energy is put on the landscape, but done in a way that protects bird habitat. By embracing proactive, collaborative, science-based approaches, energy buyers, developers, Audubon, our critical partners, and you have a pivotal role to play towards achieving this reductions by 2050. Audubon is committed in playing this active role. We're going to commit to driving at least 25% of the overall 300 gigawatt goal that the United States has over the next 3 years. But it just can't be renewable energy. We actually have to draw down carbon out of the atmosphere, carbon that's already in the atmosphere. It's really more than just energy. One of the keys to addressing climate change is unleashing nature itself. Therefore, it is imperative to amplify the power of ecosystem services, our natural climate solutions. How many of you have heard of natural climate solutions or nature-based solutions? Advancing natural climate solutions are approaches to restoring the devastation of habitat loss across our forests, coastal communities, grasslands, and all terrestrial habitats. And it's a critical tool that we know is most effective at drawing down carbon out of the atmosphere. 1/3 of climate mitigation can come from nature-based solutions. And when we are advocating and scaling nature-based solutions, we're also addressing the biodiversity crisis as well. For example, high-functioning wetlands, so abundant here in Minnesota, are a powerful climate solution. Wetlands naturally serve as a buffer to flooding and extreme rainfall, capable of storing more than 1 million gallons of water per acre. A recent study out of Texas showed that wetlands provided the region with $15 billion per year of water quality, flood protection, and carbon sequestration benefits. Globally, this number is $15 trillion annually. That's what nature does when we unleash its power. And here in Minnesota, we can thank our wetlands for our excellent drinking water, our soil health, and it has been widely reported natural climate solutions offer the greatest potential actually for storing carbon here in Minnesota. Think about this. Fully implementing these solutions across the state would mitigate up to 26 million metric tons of carbon dioxide per year, equivalent to taking 7 fossil fuel power plants off the grid. Sequestering carbon in our soil keeps it from reaching our atmosphere and puts it to good use in our natural systems. This is a great equalizer. However, the reality is we've lost more than 50% of our native wetlands here in the state. And nearly 43% of threatened and endangered species in the United States depend on wetland ecosystems. Scaling our wetland restoration here locally and protecting and adding protections for these critical habitats are going to be truly vital. While wetland acres as a whole have stabilized in our state, it is critical we continue to advance restoration programs like Audubon, Minnesota's efforts to restore floodplain forests along the upper Mississippi River. These unique and important river ecosystems create lush vegetation, dense canopy of woods, and as well as wetlands, and are critical for creating bird habitat. That natural protection protects our local cities and towns along these river, stream, and tributary systems. And you all have heard that we've lost 3 billion birds since 1970. That's a real number. We know it in science, we feel it anecdotally, and we thought of 1970 as the high water mark for environmental conservation, environmental awareness. But since that time, our report card for birds has been an F. 3 billion birds lost, nearly 30% of North America's birds. And the suite of species that are most imperiled are grassland birds. Nearly 1 billion birds that have been lost alone depend on grasslands. We need to develop local partnerships to protect grasslands everywhere, along with diverse and creative teams to advance our greatest solutions and our most efficient solutions and investments. No suite of birds are more imperiled than the birds that I love the most, grassland birds. When we lose grassland birds, you think about those ecosystem services, carbon sequestration, flood protection. These are vital things that grassland ecosystems do for us every day. Of the remaining grassland acres, 85% of them are in private land ownership, farmers and ranchers. Private landowners have to be a part of the solution in a voluntary way. We can't legislate or regulate our way onto farmer ranches, and we shouldn't. This means we need strong and effective partnerships with ranchers, our agricultural stewards and custodians of our global food system. I love this quote: "Eating is an agricultural act." There's another one I love as well. Every time you spend $1, you are casting a vote for the world that you want to live in. You have to think about what world you want to live in and own the agency that each and every one of us has in making a difference. I think about when I first started in my role as state director. I was 24 years old. I was the vice president and state director for the National Audubon Society's regional office. It was a big title. I didn't have any staff. It was just me in some old office, but I had a big title. And I remember I also had sort of a blank slate. I studied business. I didn't study biology. I learned that from farmers, ranchers, ornithologists out in the field. And I actually like it that way. I came to it with really a blank slate. In Audubon, we own this piece of land in the northwest corner of North Dakota, a little 600 acres or so. And every time I'd go up there, and we didn't burn it, we didn't graze it, it just sat there. And every time I'd go up there, I noticed something. All of the birds and all of the wildlife and all of the wildflowers and grasses, they were on the other side of the fence, on the rancher's side of the fence. And I remember the first time I met Todd Brown. Todd and Cindy Brown are ranchers up near Blaisdell, North Dakota. And Todd and I worked out a deal where we would fence the wildlife sanctuary, we would graze it, and Todd would ramp down some of his grazing on his land, and so we could expand this impact. Sometimes they call it a grass bank. And we did that. And I remember it's 5.5 hours from Fargo. So I drove out there, and we had lunch out on the prairie early October. And I'll never forget, some things just stick with you. Todd Brown's parting words that day stick with me and have always stuck with me. He said, "Marshall, this is just great. This is going to work for me. I think it's going to work for you. We're non-traditional partners, but it came together. You don't care about my cattle or what happens to them, and I can't keep track of all the little brown birds out there." And for 5.5 hours, I thought about that. I thought, well, if I'm not, as a grasslands conservationist, thinking about his bottom line, then this relationship is far too transactional. It's far too surface. And I and a group of us at Audubon begin to rethink. There are a lot of transactional programs that are absolutely vital, but we have to really think about, when we think about natural climate solutions, just having public dollars are not going to supercharge those solutions to the scale that we need to have them at. we have to change our food culture. Our food culture is broken. Fast forward, and after that, we started working on what we call the conservation ranching program. Or when I'm misbehaving, I call it the bird-friendly beef program. Are we recording this? I guess I can't get in trouble anymore. But we enrolled now, we create a standard with the best available science. The ranchers agree to meet that standard. We have a third-party auditor that checks the ranches every year. We want to make sure that our standards are producing more birds and healthier soils, reducing the amount of chemicals in the system, because we felt the Audubon brand was an incredibly powerful force for good out on the landscape. Fast forward, we've now enrolled 150 ranches in that program, nearly 4 million acres across 14 states in this climate smart certification program. Across Audubon certified lands, bird data shows that functional diversity, now 7 years on for some of these ranches, a measure of bird community representation across different foraging pathways, has increased across our portfolio of ranches by nearly a third. It's working. This means that more diverse and resilient bird communities are supported on Audubon certified bird-friendly ranches. With over 400 community points of purchase throughout the country, from Meijer Grocery to Whole Foods, we aim to facilitate the growth of a bird-friendly marketplace which rewards landowners for their clearing a high bar for beef production, which centers soil health, bird habitat, and empowers consumers, hopefully like you, who care deeply for birds and the environment. Market-based conservation efforts offers an incredible opportunity for everyday people to align their choices and needs with the environmental imperatives of our generation. Biodiversity loss and climate change are at the core of that. Food and how we produce food can be an incredible, powerful force for good. Now, I did mention I am a millennial, and I am a somewhat cynical millennial that I am. I have to ask myself from time to time when I think about market-based conservation and regenerative agriculture and the promise of these buzzwords and what they should represent, is this just conscientious consumerism? You know, where everyday people pay more for things to atone for years of misguided ag policy? It can't just be that. When we think about the promise of regenerative agriculture, empowering consumers, it's gotta be about more than just creating niche programs. We have to scale this work, and it has to mean something. To truly transform the food industry, we have to align to and be more comprehensive and creative than just things that create opportunities for the few. I have to tell you, growing up, we couldn't afford to shop at Whole Foods every night. So when we think about rebuilding the food culture, we have to make it as inclusive as possible, or we undermine the potential of regenerative agriculture. And it would be a sad irony, a tragic irony, given that the fundamentals of regenerative agriculture are built on traditional ecological knowledge handed down from us by indigenous land stewards. It's important for us to keep in perspective the need to build a big tent as it relates to regenerative agriculture, or we leave out the most vulnerable. Regenerative grazing that we do through our program mimics those natural cycles, aligns production with the cycles of nature, the way livestock would naturally interact with ecological systems, such as bison roaming the Great Plains and the Great Prairies, allowing for a rich biodiversity of plants and grasses. Strong soils give grazing animals the nutrition they need and acts as a carbon sinking device, drawing out carbon from our atmosphere. It's really a win-win scenario for ranchers, for consumers, for our land, and for birds. And regenerative agriculture's got to be more than just about grazing and more than just about grasslands. I can't believe I said that. I hope someone got that on record. But you think about the amount of land that we use for grain production. Right here at the University of Minnesota is really incredible work being done by researchers on perennial grains. Perennial grains like kernza offer an amazing potential to transform and retool our grain production. Perennial grains like kernza can result in as much as 95% reduction in nitrogen leaks in the soil. That's huge. When we think about sequestering greenhouse gases and retaining water, perennial grains where we don't have to till or plow, spray every year. These plants work within semi-arid and arid landscapes. The inputs that can drive farmers out of business, we reduce that through perennial grains. I think it's one of the most exciting things in regenerative agriculture right now. And for anyone associated with the University of Minnesota, you have to be proud with what this team is doing. I know that I am. Finally, our collective voices are truly a mobilizing force that inspires, informs, can drive meaningful action. Action starts with community building. And having those types of conversations like we're having tonight are so important to that. And so I want to thank President Gable and Dean Nisha Buchwe for inviting me to share in this special conversation and be part of the school's commitment to leading the way to a clean and sustainable future. I also want to give a very special thanks. She's in Egypt right now, but our board member and member of the staff here at the University of Minnesota, Dr. Jessica Hellman, who made this possible. And most of all, I want to thank Tom Swain and the Swain Climate Policy Series for having the vision to create this forum. You know, when I think about what I want to share with you and what I want you to take away with tonight, I think about words that were shared with me by my friend Bill Tadigan. Bill runs one of our nature centers and sanctuaries along the Platte River. And he asked me about 12 years ago, Marshall, do you know what the saddest 5 words in the English language are? You should have been there. You should have seen it. You should have seen the birds darken the sky. You should have heard the loons call out from the great beyond. I implore you, as you think about your actions, let's not, and you think about what we can do together, let's not ever be in a position to tell our sons and daughters, you should have been there, because it's no longer there. Let's not let our impact of our presence be the reason for birds' absence. Thank you so much.
What a wonderful message from Marshall. Thank you so much, Marshall. So before you think you're done with us tonight, I have just a few questions that I'd like to share with you. These questions are submitted by several of our Humphrey School students, and maybe one from those of you in the audience. I love this first question. When the effects of climate change impact communities in such different ways, how do you build the coalition needed to affect policy?
Oh, it's such a good question. This is going to sound maybe a little cliche, but you listen. For Audubon, we like to say that we're local everywhere. And that means really rolling up our sleeves and listening to the various communities that we work with. It could be an indigenous tribe in the boreal forest, and we work with them to transfer land back to indigenous land stewardship. We start with listening. It could be an opportunity to create a carbon offset program, but the offset program may disadvantage communities that are close to the center of maybe the emission source. We've got to take that into consideration. And sometimes you have communities that are impacted by say a carbon scheme where you have asthma rates that are 600 times higher than other communities. And oftentimes, I gotta tell you, these tend to be communities of color. So listening and managing and being deliberate about not causing harm, inadvertently or deliberately, comes out, I think, of partnering and being an ally in a authentic way that's grounded on what you learn through listening. And in that way, you build a stronger coalition, a more authentic partnership.
Thank you. So someone wrote in, as a BIPOC individual in this field, what have you seen as the most effective ways for BIPOC folks to truly have a voice and impact on climate work compared to their white counterparts?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's so important is that as a person of color, I bring all of myself to the work. Organizations have, as we do, and we're committed to their equity, diversity goals and values, so on and so forth. And I always, whenever I'm asked this question, or a question like this from some of my white colleagues from other organizations, actually, I always say, you want to be more diverse. That's a good thing. You want to have your movement or your organization more inclusive. That's a great thing. There's such strength in diversity. But understand that diversity, you have to be open to the organization and you changing, because you're learning because people are bringing all of themselves to the work. Sometimes we invite people from different communities into our work, but we want them to change before they get there. And I think it's really important, and that can be very lonely as a person of color, when you feel you sort of have to change to meet a certain organization's culture. Part of, I think, authentic equity, diversity, and inclusion is creating the environment to be changed. So.
Creating the environment to be changed. Thank you. So I have one more.
Okay.
Our last question is a perfect one to end on, giving us concrete examples of what we can do. So what are 1 to 2 things regular people can do to help birds survive at home and at work?
Absolutely, that's a great one. I think number one, birds as I alluded to earlier, they have this amazing journey. I'll tell you a quick story. I believe it's the red knot nest on the shores of Alaska and winters in Australia, crossing the Yellow Sea and the tidal flats. Well, those birds go to Alaska and they nest. And the mom and the parents, they up and take off before the young birds can even fly. But those birds are wired to make that perilous 13,000 mile journey that they've never made before. They've never been there. And so along the way, your backyard can be such a vital, critical stopover for those birds. We have a program and a website. You can go plantsforbirds.com or .org. And you can type in your address and find the birds in your backyard that should be in your backyard that are going to provide the best nutrients and habitat for birds in migration, are birds that are stopping over for the summer. So number one, really be intentional about your backyards and or your balconies. Be really intentional. I think that's important. Number two, I alluded to it. I believe that through revolutionizing the Farm Bill, which is a nearly $1 trillion program that is, in so many ways, it's the foundation of our food culture, and that's good and bad. But it's an incredible vehicle to change, or to drive change, or facilitate and incentivize change. Be intentional about what you eat to the best of your ability. That doesn't mean stop eating this or stop eating that. It's really about how, you all have cell phones. It's one of the most powerful tools that any generation on this planet have ever had. Everything's at your fingertips. Take time to be intentional about learning how your food is produced. I think that's so important, and it's actually maybe the third rail, or one of the most untapped things, because we get into these sort of fad diets, don't eat this, don't eat that. No, be intentional about how the food is produced. Support those ranchers and farmers that are going the extra mile to care for their land, habitat, and those little critters.
All right, so I'm going to make sure that I'm a good host in the summer for these birds that are flying over, and I'll be intentional, as we all will, about what we put in our mouths in support of these ranchers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Please join me in thanking Marshall Johnson. What I heard of what's important to take home with us tonight, especially after this week's election, is that there's something we can do to curb the climate crisis. We can act, we can vote, we can affect change. At the Humphrey School, we educate and empower students of all backgrounds and sectors to work toward good policy that advances the common good. Thanks again to Marshall and to Audubon for being part of our Advancing Climate Solutions Now. We know the time is now to address the climate crisis. A special thank you to the Swain Climate Policy donors whose generosity helped to make tonight possible, and to our dear friend Tom Swain. A video from tonight's lecture will be available on our website in the coming days. That's at hhh.umn.edu. So before we go, I'd like to add a plug for our next lecture we have coming up that was just announced yesterday. On December 6th, right back here on this stage, we will host Nicole Hannah-Jones, the author of the 1619 Project for the Distinguished Carlson Lecture. Tickets are online and are free. You won't want to miss that conversation. I encourage you to click and get your ticket as soon as possible. And so thank you, and have a great evening. Good night.